Hello and welcome to another video. So today we're taking a look at the Prebuilt for Sword, the Heroes 4, of course being the key with Dragon Knights, obviously with that kind of title, but honestly I wanted to give this deck a fair go because it interested me, and this sword deck actually isn't too bad based on the cards that are in it. Sky Commander Celia is a pretty core card along with Zeta, which is actually really good value. Both of those reach quite high value in my opinion, along with some other really decent cards. Dragon Knights being an extremely good gold, Lancer of Tempest at 3 of, it's actually a pretty decent gold as well, and Innocent Princess Prim, another good gold. So honestly all the golds in this deck, even Chromatic Duel, all quite valuable and good. I couldn't fault those overall. It would have been nice if we got 3 Dragon Knights instead of 1. Maybe swap that out for 2, that out for 2, and just ran 3 of those. That could have been nicer, or maybe even just drop the Prims and go straight for the Dragon. But it still worked out pretty well. It's also got some nice silvers if you are just starting out and really lack any kind of decent cards. So a nice beginner deck to get you started, and the structure of the deck is actually pretty good as well. Most of these cards are in most mid-range or aggro variants of Sword anyway, so there's a lot of value held in this deck there as well. I mean, aggro decks will run things like Shadow Enforcer, most mid-range will run things like Charlotte, Frontline Cavalier, all those sort of cards are very common in meta decks for Sword at the moment, and Sword is still doing quite well in the current meta. Overall though, this deck on a whole doesn't compete that well against current rotation decks, just because it lacks the extra cards, I would say. Having, you know, 3 Sky Commander Celia, 3 Zeta, 3 Dragon Knights make a lot of difference to this deck and would really help it out. But just for beginner value or value for veterans who are missing these cards and just lack sword cards, this is a pretty great deck. So we're going to check out a couple of games and get right into that. So after playing about 8 games with this deck so far on the current ladder, I do have to say it does lack in being able to do big aggressive pushes that Sword usually does, mainly because you just lack those extra Celia and Zeta and things like that that really help push you over the line for Sword. And as for mid-range, you're missing a lot of legendaries, which is a little unfortunate, but for value-wise, these 2 legendaries are still quite good. Of course, the alt card for this deck isn't that great. Unbridled Fury just doesn't seem to have that kind of value that you'd want to run in a lot of decks, which is a little disappointing, but it is a nice looking card nonetheless. I did end up winning one of the 7-8 games that I played with this deck, and that's not too bad considering the Forest deck I was unable to win a single game outside of an instant concede. So the game you're checking out right now is actually the one I did manage to win. Blood makes sense because they deal a lot of damage to themselves, which means you don't need to do quite as big bursts. In lower ranks, these decks would definitely perform a lot better, and I kind of wish I could test these in lower ranks, but unfortunately being Master means I can't actually do that for you guys, so it's a little disappointing. But overall, I think if you were to run this in ranks, probably around A or lower, you would be okay, because this deck is quite good, and it does have the consistency to do well. It's just a matter of a lot of Master decks running a lot of strong meta decks. Of course, you will come across a few meta decks in the lower ranks, but I feel like they're a lot more unoptimized. At least back when I used to be in those ranks, they were fairly unoptimized. There's a nice Nuct, not really a problem for us. Getting a lot of value out of the cards is usually the important part of this deck. So Frontline Cavalier is great because it does both heal and allow us to deal a lot of damage, especially with something like Oathless Knight, really stacking our board up. So I do accidentally miss 1 damage here though with the 1-2, which is a little disappointing. Putting them to 7 would have been better. Don't make those mistakes, guys. It is pretty terrible when you do, especially in a matchup against Blood. Of course, I do know that I put them into Vengeance. That was deliberate. I knew that the only way to win this would be just to rush them down as quickly as possible. So waiting off wouldn't have been the optimum play, especially since they are now dealing damage to themselves, so that does help us out a bit. Fortunately, the Celia is just going to close the game pretty much instantly anyway, so not bad at all. Your strength is formidable. So now for one of the games that I couldn't quite win, this was against Forest, and they were actually a lower ranked player, which isn't that surprising. They were probably upper A, I think that is, which isn't too bad, but Honestly, this deck does struggle in a lot of matchups in Master against refined decks, and that's to be expected. These decks are more designed for beginners, or just for people who are missing the legendaries or golds, and want to get the value out of them, and this deck honestly isn't that bad for that. Being able to get those golds is quite good. And the legendaries definitely have some value in the current meta. But if I had to honestly rate this deck right now, I would say that it's definitely above the Forest deck. I'm going to create a big tier list for these decks, at least on my personal opinion, towards the end, and this is definitely above Forest right now. So we've currently got Forest as the lowest deck and Sword as the top deck because they're the only two we've gone through. But not bad. I mean, really, considering these are pre-built and considering what are in them, they still do okay. I would like them to have a little more value, so they were more like structure decks in other games that at least still have a decent chance to compete with some good combos. But beggars can't be choosers, and the value that you do get is there for 800 crystals. There isn't much more that you can buy for 800 crystals that would be better. I mean, if you did 50 crystal packs every day, you could get 16 packs, which would be okay. But it's not immediate value, and the odds of pulling a legendary is about 1 in 10. I think the actual odds are about 1 in 8, but for practicality's sake, 1 in 10 is a fair thing to say. And even then, you're not guaranteed. So honestly, getting 2 guaranteed legendaries is probably a better value, especially with the golds as well, even if you are just vialing them. So this deck, I would say, is a pretty solid 8 out of 10 for value, just because the legendaries are that good if you don't have them. And for playability, I would probably put it around a 6 or 7 at the moment out of 10, just because it does have that little bit of edge. Once we can tally all these scores and set everything up, it will be pretty easy. If you guys are interested in that, be sure to like and subscribe because we will have all these pre-builts going up. I will also have a playlist if you guys want to check those out, so you can check out all the videos about the pre-builts individually if you guys are interested. And then once we are finished, I will have that big roundup video that will go up and be added to that playlist, just as an accumulation of my opinions on every single pre-built for you guys. I feel like going in depth like this and being able to look at each deck and see how it plays is a little better than just looking at the deck straight up and saying, oh, this has good value, as I think value and playability are both fairly important points, especially for beginners and things like that, where playability definitely plays a role. So I do go for the Celia Hope Strategist. Honestly, I just kind of pushed whatever I could, hoping that they wouldn't be able to bust through this ward too easily. Unfortunately, Fairy Driver kind of ruins that plan a little bit, which is disappointing, as they are fairly easily going to tank this. I did have at least a chance though. I mean, we could have had the dragon next turn, would have been some pretty good damage. We just got a little unlucky and unfortunately did manage to finish this off pretty easily there. So I'd have to say, if you are interested in this deck, definitely buy it. I mean, the Celia and the Beatrix are both good. If you are interested in playing Sword, and you already have a few legendaries and a few of the other cards to really make it up, like a couple of the gold Dragonites and stuff like that, you could definitely build a very solid Sword deck, and it would fare pretty well. But in lower ranks, this deck should be fine on its own. I can't see why it would be a problem. The Forest deck, obviously, I felt lacked a lot more than this deck. This deck definitely has the better value and the better playability than the Forest deck that we've looked at previously. But we'll see how it stacks up against the other decks in the future. Hopefully you guys did enjoy the video. You'll find the deck list to this in the description below. And I'll catch you guys next time. See ya.